Greetings everyone, I am Dr. J. The last time I did a video like this, my aim was to demonstrate that even a game about killing monsters and taking their stuff can be seen as a work of art. This time, however, I'll be attempting to do something simultaneously much easier and much harder, explaining what I find so compelling about Undertale. Before I begin, however, let this be a warning to all who enter. There will be spoilers aplenty throughout this video. If you have not played the game yet, I strongly encourage you to do so before continuing further. Not only is the game well worth seeing for yourself, but it works best when you know as little about it as possible. So before I show too much, please go enjoy it before watching this video. So with that out of the way, let's talk about Undertale. Honestly though, it's hard to know where to really begin or what to focus on when it comes to this game. There is a lot that works really well, and this video alone has gone through the most script rewrites of anything that I've done for this channel, ever. So after plenty of time thinking about the subject, I decided to focus on one aspect in particular and how it affects the game as a whole. Its understanding of the player's perspective. This might seem like an odd thing to focus on, as when we're judging a game, the interactive element is the thing that makes games unique as an art form, and is usually taken as a point of fact as a result. Whenever we talk about the medium, the focus is usually on whether said interaction is worth going through or not. The reason I'm focusing on this, however, is because Undertale wholeheartedly embraces and understands the role of the player, more so than any other game I've seen. And you need look no further than YouTube or a wiki to see the wide breadth of different choices that can be made throughout. There is so much attention to detail given to every little facet, not because it needs to be there, but because the game knows that the inquisitive player will go looking for it. Watching my brother play it was a decent amount of fun for me because he found things that I didn't, and with my knowledge of the game, more things stood out that I would have never noticed the first time around. The combat screen is perhaps the greatest example of the game recognizing your impact in the world. While in most cases we would only think to fight the monsters in front of us, we're also given the option to try and resolve fights peacefully. Simply that option's existence will prompt some curiosity, leaving us receptive to what ends up lying within. Beyond that, whether we choose to fight or show mercy can end up having a huge effect on the ending, something which not even certain high-profile RPGs are able to pull off. However, the game is also clever enough to realize that most of us will go into it thinking that if it looks like an RPG and quacks like an RPG, then it's probably an RPG. That means when we see a monster standing in our way, we need to defeat the enemy and become strong to take on greater threats. However, while we have that habit built up from one too many RPGs, eventually we can reach the point where we start to wonder why we're killing them at all. In most games, that question arises from spending too long on the grindstone, but in this case the question is raised in one of two places, either when nobody came or by Toriel's fight. If you are someone who does grind away, to suddenly see that nobody came, and then to see it backed up by the haunting music, the reality of the situation is going to throw you completely off guard, as while you might have had a primer before with the option to show mercy, old habits die hard. As for Toriel's fight, this will look like the first boss fight to the unaware player, where she is standing in our way and we need to bring her low to demonstrate that we are strong enough to continue. Everything about her inevitable death is designed to shock you. The damage you inflict on the killing blow is a lot more than you expect, all of the cheerful music vanishes, and in her last words you realize that despite what some of the monsters may have led you to believe, she really did have your best interests at heart. Though it's absolutely painful to watch unfold for those of us who have played the game, that punch to the gut is exactly what the unfamiliar newcomer needs to set the tone for the rest of the game. Even if we reset to resolve it peacefully, Flowey will still remember and mock us for going back, making him a lot creepier than he was before. Now, not only is the player aware that there's more going on underneath the surface, but that the game is fully aware of your actions and will continue messing with you based on what you might or might not expect. In fact, that subversion of expectations is another one of the game's strengths, as each area contrasts the one before it beautifully, mentally priming us to be thrown off guard when we meet the next challenge. For instance, how many of you caught on to Alphys' self-insertion into your journey before Mettaton flat out told you? The reason I bring this up is because it's something that's hinted at on multiple occasions. How would Alphys have known to put in a jetpack, a bomb defusal program, and a way to turn your soul into Galaga mode? As much as technology has advanced, there's only so much that you can stuff into a phone. So why put in such extemporaneous features, and why those in particular? That's not even going into the robotic cough, the fact that Mettaton shouldn't have known you've seen the colored tile maze in Snowden, and the fact that Alphys might have been manipulating it from her lab. I think the reason a lot of us didn't pick up on this was because the antics involved in that section seemed on par with what Sans and Papyrus threw at us in Snowden. By that point, likely because of Toriel's death on our hands, we'll be trying to act more peacefully, and all of the silliness on display seems like it'll be a common theme. And especially after getting past Undyne's intense desire to stab us in the face, it would be a welcome change of pace. As another example, there are double meanings at multiple points throughout. EXP and LV may have the same function as we've seen before, but are represented differently in the Underground, as execution points and level of violence, adding another sinister aspect to what we've been doing if we've killed someone, despite what Flowey told us about love. When we find the coffins below Asgore's throne room, at first we see the name we gave the fallen human. For someone who doesn't know about the canonically named Chara, this is going to be a moment of dread, as up to that point, pretty much everyone has been saying that this is going to be the most daunting part of your journey, which is only amplified by seeing a coffin apparently already prepared for you. And yet, when you go through the pacifist or genocide route, you'll have learned that Chara might technically bear the name you gave her, but is still a character in her own right, the first human that fell into the Underground. In fact, Chara is perhaps the most interesting aspect of player interaction because it seems that she is the incarnation of us as the player. To start off, though I'm using she for the sake of better grammar and to piss Tumblr off, both Chara and the human you control, namely Frisk, aren't given any gender by the game or characters within it. For the purpose of the story, it doesn't matter what their gender is because they're meant to be an insert that any one of us can take on, and is therefore left ambiguous. Beyond that, whenever Flowey addresses the player directly, the name used is always the one we gave to Chara, and for someone who seems to have a knowledge of the outside world, this would be an odd choice if Chara weren't in some way our in-game avatar. It's also interesting to think about the actions that are outside of our control and how they are influenced by our decisions. Typically when we play RPGs, we tend to go to two polar extremes, either the do-gooder with a stupid saccharine shtick to match, or the unrelenting psychopath with a murderous disposition. When we first play the game, we'll end up somewhere in the middle due to lack of familiarity, but the endings that lead to the most satisfying conclusions are when we embrace either extreme, and how Frisk, or perhaps more accurately Chara, act in those circumstances is interesting to look at. When we're doing the pacifist route, we play the game according to the antics presented, going through fights, dates, and other silliness knowing there's a way to do so without directly hurting anyone. In essence, we treat it like a typical video game. When we go through the genocide route, however, Chara appears to be to some degree possessing Frisk, causing him to be described as having a smile on his face, the dust of fallen monsters coating his hands, as he creeps forward with no regard for anything but the kill. All of the puzzles and cheerful music are either gone or distorted, and at the end we are given the non-choice of destroying the world or destroying the world, because we made our choice by getting this far, and since when were you the one in control? In fact, the soulless pacifist route may be the most compelling piece of evidence that Chara is indeed our in-game avatar, as if we go back after doing the genocide route, we metaphorically and literally give up our soul in order to do so, though arguably before that point we had already given it up, you monster. Philosophical quandary aside, by the end of it, Chara fully possesses Frisk and kills everyone anyway, again taking control away from us. One of the things we always take for granted when we play a game is that, while the game usually doesn't know how often we've played it, we're so used to assuming that what we do in one run won't affect us in the next. And yet, when it comes to RPGs old and new, what we know from a previous playthrough could have a major impact on how we act, hence the different endings entirely. To recognize that, Undertale gives us the one thing we can't escape, the one thing that will haunt us until the end, our own nature, the demon that comes when you call its name. So before we end up in an overly dark rabbit hole, let's talk about something more uplifting. Because to me, the best example of the game embracing player choice hinges on what Flowey says when he tells you why he's continued to stand in your way. Don't you get it? This is all just a game. If you leave the Underground satisfied, you'll win the game. If you win, you won't want to play with me anymore. And what would I do then? The main thing that he seems to suggest is that the game is over when you say that the game is over. It doesn't matter how much of the game you've seen or how you went about playing it. So long as you walked away satisfied, then the game has done its job. Winning in that sense isn't a matter of victory, but rather the sense of enjoyment, of walking away in a better mood than you began, which is kind of ironic given the genocide route, but that's beside the point. That idea of winning is also interesting when you look at the fan base that built itself around the game. Pretty much every time I try to talk to someone about Undertale, the conversation can usually be summarized by gushing over the game's strong points but then slamming the fanbase for being cancerous. There are plenty of shots that can be taken at the more, determined members of said fanbase, but one behavior in particular really gets under my skin because it goes against that entire point. Telling people how to play the game. You must do a pacifist route where you kill no one. Then you must do a genocide route where you act like a heartless bastard. And then you must tell us how awesome the game is and bask in its awesomeness with us, and don't you dare stray away from that path or you'll never hear the end of it. The irony is that if the cancerous part of the fanbase would have allowed people to consume the game in the manner which they wanted to, there would be a lot more interesting things to talk about. As mentioned earlier, how you play the game when you know what's going on versus when you don't lead to completely different playstyles, which is why I encourage people to play the game before watching this video. In fact, the main point of contention for me occurs by even telling people there is a pacifist and genocide route, because then the illusion is broken before it's allowed to form. The whole point of the ruins is to set the tone for the game when you're moving through the underground, giving the feeling of an old RPG with an interesting bullet hell twist thrown in for good measure. The point is to get people into a familiar comfort zone before pulling the rug from under them with Toriel's boss fight or when nobody came. All you end up doing is robbing one of the most pivotal moments for new players and make yourselves look like spoiled perfectionists all the while. And that's not even going into the fact that there's no need to yell at people for killing Toriel because the game inflicts more than its fair share of psychological torment, assuming you too weren't robbed of this moment. The only reason I can speak to it is because I didn't know how to resolve it peacefully despite my knowledge of the 2 runs, which might be the only saving grace to knowing. And so to that part of the internet that does want everyone to play a certain way, you completely missed the point. Undertale has a lot to offer, and while the most common routes lead to seeing the main story the fastest, demanding that people act a certain way and the information you give them to do so only weakens the game. It's because of the choices you make throughout and how these are reflected in the game world that makes it compelling. If you truly like this game, then giving things like that away should be the last thing you do. It's unnecessary, it's unproductive, and it suggests a lack of faith in a game that you are otherwise so quick to declare as the second coming of Christ. It makes me wonder which analogy works better. Are you the apostles being overly selective about who approaches their savior, or the Pharisees who crucified him? Because by your actions, you have accomplished both. And honestly, the fact that I can rant on about this subject for far too long should give away how much I like this game myself, to where every time I try to write that rant, I keep finding myself pulling away saying enough is enough, and then jumping back in to fire more shots at people. There's definitely more than I could cover, but for the sake of brevity, that's all I have for this video, so thank you all for watching. Please like and share this if you find it deserving, and subscribe to this channel for more overly important video game analysis, as well as other content, posted on a pseudo-regular basis. Let me know what I inevitably forgot to talk about or consider in the comments below, and I'll see you all later.